Very first Mishnah in Maseches Avos, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai mesora Yehoshua v'Yehushua zekenim v'zekenim nevi'im unevi'im mesoruol anshe Knesset haGedolah. So just for clarity's sake, we would like to spend a little time on the Mesiras haTorah from Moshe Rabbeinu until the Chasimas of Torah Shebal Peh. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu was given from Sinai Torah Shebiksav, which we have, which started off being just Torah, but Lemaise, nevi'im, uksuvim, all 24 seforim are part of Torah Shebiksav. This is Torah Shebiksav, and thereafter is Torah Shebal Peh. The Maseches Avos, specifically and precisely the first two poskim in Maseches Avos, discusses the Mesiras haTorah from dorot to dorot, and I would like to make a short review with you together about the Mesiras haTorah as set forth in this Mishnayos of Pirkei Avos. The Gemara says, whoever wants to be a Chassid, hi boy, and need the Chasiduso, you should study, you should learn Maseches Avos. Mishnah says, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai mesora Yehoshua. Moshe was the manig, which was manig b'yechidus, is mekabel Torah miSinai, and is mesora Yehoshua. The Maral shtel zavek that the reason why it's called Mesiras haTorah is because he was given almenas to give over weiter. Torah, in other words, you only get it in order to transfer it to the next generation. So, like we have in Yerusha a concept of acharecha leploini, so too Moshe was mekabel, but he was Moshe the Yehoshua almenas to be manchil to others. Torah is called Torah tzivolonu Moshe moirosho ki'ilas Yaakov. Moirosha is meloshin Yerusha. Yerusha is something that goes from generation to generation. Whoever lives has the assets, has the nechasim. Thereafter, lachar is ptira, it goes be Yerusha from one generation to the next. Yehoshua gave the Torah to the zekenim. Who are the zekenim who Yehoshua gave the Torah to? The Rishonim, and so does the Geonim, learn that the zekenim is the tkufa of the shoftim, which were after Yehoshua. Apparently, there was a short kufa between Yehoshua and zekenim, which the Gemara in Shabbos tells us there were some zekenim asher erichu yomim acharei Yehoshua, and they lived for a year and 10 months after the kufa of Yehoshua. But in the Mishnah in Maseches Avos, Yehoshua mesora zekenim, we're referring to those 15 shoftim which spread around the tkufa of approximately 350 years from Ptiras Yehoshua until Shmuel HaNavi. And I would just like to name them so we should have it arois klor. Yehoshua, the first one is the first shofet after the tkufa of the zekenim, is Osniel ben Kenaz, who was machzir the Torah befilpulei. The Gemara in Tamur will discuss it a little later. After the halacha was nishtakhu b'mei shel Moshe, Osniel ben Kenaz, who was son-in-law of Kolev ben Yefune, he gave him his daughter Achsa bas Kolev. He says, whoever, we learned it, whoever is going to capture and conquer Kirya Sefer, which are those halachos which nishtakhu b'mei shel Moshe, he is the first shofet, Osniel ben Kenaz, mishevet Yehuda. After him is Ehud ben Gera, who was a shofet mishevet Binyamin, and afterwards was Shamgar ben Anos, who was mishevet Levi. After those three shoftim, Rashi, the Gemara says, Ein lecho kol shevet v'shevet shelo yemidu mimenu shofet, and Rashi is puzzled in Masechta Sukkah about some of the shoftim. Rashi is a controversial Rashi, and some of the things what Rashi says there are atzorichian. The Yavitz and the Marshal speak about it, but here is not the place to discuss the belongings of the shoftim Only the ones we know for certain were spelled out in Sefer Shoftim, we will bring out. Dvoiro Eishes Lapidois, Hishoftes Yisroel. Some say she was from Shevet Ephraim. Together with Barak ben Avinoyam, they were both Shoftim after Shamgar ben Anas. Thereafter, we have the Shofet Gideon, who is also called Yerubal, Gideon ben Yoyesh, who was Shevet Menashe. Then we have his son Avimelech ben Gideon. Shaila is because of his anhoge, some, the Radak, brings different shitas and maybe he's not considered one of the Shoftim. Then was Toilo ben Fua, who was from Shevet Yisachar. Yoyer Agil Odi from Shevet Menashe. Ivtzon, who the Geonim Baba Basad of Tzadik Aleph tells us he was Ivtzon Zeboyaz, he was from Shevet Yehuda. Ivtzon was Mibeis Lechem, Mishevet Yehuda. After Ivtzon is Eloin, which was from Shevet Zvulun, he was called Elul Zvuloni. After him was Avdoin ben Ilel Aparasoini, he was from Shevet Ephraim. Then we have Shimshon Agiber, Shimshon ben Manoach, who was from Shevet Don, and thereafter Eli Hazokein, who is the end of Tkufas HaShoftim. We have 15 Shoftim. If Yehoshua is also called a Shofet, Chazal mentioned Yehoshua also, he's one of the Shoftim. 15 Shoftim who are, according to the Goyen and some Rishonim, those are the zekenim mentioned in Mesiras haTorah. The zekenim l'nevi'im. You know, the Gemara mentions many nevi'im were in Klal Yisrael, but we'd like to focus on all those nevi'im which are mentioned in Tanakh, and we'll start. Shmuel HaNavi was the first Navi. Thereafter we find God HaNavi and Nosan HaNavi. Afterwards we find Achio Hashiloini, who was the Rebbe of Eliyahu HaNavi. And then we have for a part-time Shmayo, which is also mentioned Isha Elikim, and according to most Rishonim, he was called a Navi, even though we don't find a specified Nevuah for Shmayo. Then we have Eliyahu HaNavi, Elisha, his Talmud, and then we have some of the nevi'im. We know the way it's printed, nevi'im Rishonim, nevi'im Acharonim, but not particularly the Seder it's printed. That was the chronological order that the nevi'im took place. Let me tell you how the nevi'im were, according to the history. The chronological order was Yoina, Amos, Yeshaya. Yoina and Amos were prior to Yeshaya. Hoshea ben Be'eri, who was after Yeshaya, Micha, Nachum, Tzfanya, and then Yirmiyahu, and then Yechezkel, both Kohanim, according to the father of the Radak, who were father and son, Yirmiyahu and Yechezkel, Chavakuk and Yoel, and Oivadya. Those were called all Nevi'im Rishonim. And 9 of them are mentioned in Treyosar. Then the nevi'im Acharonim, who are Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who came back with Golus, Bavel, Chorosh, and Damascus with Ezra, sefer, to build the second Beis HaMikdash, they were already considered Anshe Knesset haGedolah. So we have Moshe Rabbeinu, you have Yehoshua ben Nun, we have some zekenim who were with Yehoshua for a short while without mentioning their name, who lived less than 2 years. We have the Tkufas of the 15 Shoftim for 350 years. And then we have the Tkufa of the Nevi'im, which approximately lived up to 1,000 years, 1,011 years after the Tkufa of Yehoshua to the Tkufa of Bais Sheni. Tchilas Bais Sheni. The Anshe Knesset haGedolah, the Knesset haGedolah was Lemaise during the Tkufa of Bais Sheni. Anshe Knesset haGedolah, under the beginning, started under the Malchus Poras, that he let the Melech of Poras let them build the Beis HaMikdash. They appointed 120 members, which were members in Anshe Knesset haGedolah. In the Roish Anshe Knesset haGedolah was Ezra HaSefer. The Gemara, according to one of the Omar in Masechtas Megillah, Ezra ze Malachi. They would like to identify Ezra with Malachi. Ezra sefer, as we spoke about, he was a Kohen. Ezra sefer was the Roish, the Yoshev Roish from the Anshe Knesset haGedolah. They lemaise clinched off the Tanakh. They were the one who wrapped up the Tanakh. We know that the last nevuah, which we just read in Shabbos haGadol, the Orvel Hashem Minchas Yehuda Yerushalayim Kime'olim Ukeshon Mikadmonius, the end is Hineni Sholech Lochem Es Eliyahu Anovi Lifnei Bo Yom Hashem HaGadol V'Hanoyer V'Heishiv Levavis. This is the Tama Parashas nevi'im. By the way, the reason why the Smag in Akdom says it says Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi is because Kol Zman the nevi'im are around. This halacha of Elov Tishmon and Novi could really uproot the Sugyas HaGemora and Yevamis Davtzadi, and Novi can uproot Dover Min HaTorah B'Shev Altaso B'Kum Ve'ese and B'Meshane. Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi, the Rambam in Akdoma Tiprish HaMishnah in Zroim calls Malachi Messiah Manevim, and his last nevuah, which we read in Shabbos haGadol, at the end he says Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi, says the Smag. The reason for that being is because Kol Zman, there is a parasha of nevuah in the world, it could be changed, it's revocable, it's reversible. You could reconstitute and rewrite or revisit any halacha subject to certain stipulation and contingencies, but it's Elov Tishmon, he could do it beherasha. Once the Tanakh was nechtam, this is a new era, a new period, which is wrapped up with Chagai, Zcharia, Malachi, and they have the Anshe Knesset haGedolah, which again, Chagai, Zcharia, Malachi, were in the gvul between the end of Parashas Nevuah and the beginning of Parsha of the Anshe Knesset haGedolah. There we read very clearly in Pirkei Avos. The last member of Anshe Knesset haGedolah was Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik has a dual position. On one hand, he was Kohen Gadol and Bayis Sheni. Shimon HaTzadik is mentioned a few places in Shas as serving as a Kohen Gadol, and he also was a Chaver in Knesset haGedolah. During his time, the Yevonim, Alexander Mukdoin, the Yevoni, he conquered Eretz Yisroel, and the Gemara tells us the story that Shimon HaTzadik, went to meet, he had a conference with Alexander Mukdoin, which had a lot of derech eretz for Shimon HaTzadik, and he was mevatel and mezime of the Kusim to destruct the Beis HaMikdash again. They went to make the Malshono, and Shimon HaTzadik went and made a Hafgana, Tzuva Hafginu Balaylo, and he went there, he met with Alexander Mukdoin, he was mevatel the Gzeira. The Talmud and the Mamshich of the derech of Shimon HaTzadik was Antigonus, Ish Soichoi. Soichoi is the name of a place. He was the one who was Moisevaita the Torah. Unfortunately, he had two Talmidim who did not exactly understood the way he gave over the Torah. One of them was called Sodik, and one of them is called Baitus. Each one of them had a cult, had a kas. Kas HaTzdukim, we find throughout Shas, many places, all kind of interpretations by the Tzdukim, and the Chazal, on the contrary, we went Lohitzim Milibim Shel Tzdukim, a lot of takonos and a lot of establishments where Lohitzim is Yibim Shel Tzdukim, and he was Antigonus Ishoichoi, he was the one who gave over the Torah and had those two Talmidim. Says in the Mishnah, Pirkei Avos, chachamim hizoaru b'divreichem. The reason why Dor b'divreichem, says the Rambam, is because Antigonus Ishoichoi was the one who had the Talmidim who were not nizo b'dvorim, and therefore they had their own psakim about Sfiras Oimer, about Ktsiras Oimer, about Ananak Toires, about Mimochras HaShabbos, etc., and became a major machlekes between the Prushim, which was the kas of Shimon HaTzadik and his Talmidim, and the Tzdukim and the Baitusim. Right after Antigonus Ish Soichoi started a new Anhoga in Klal Yisrael. And the Anhoga was called Zugos. What is Zugos? They decided that they're going to split. They're going to have one Nosi HaSanhedrin. We know that these halacha, the whole Mishnah is in Sanhedrin, certain things that you need Beis Nishan, Aleph, and Sanhedrin. So the Nosi of the Sanhedrin, he had a certain power of control in the Sanhedrin, the Nesiya Sanhedrin. And the second one was Av Beis Din. He served as Av Beis Din. Certain things were given to the Sanhedrin, B'Teira Sanhedrin. Here is not the mokum to discuss. And there's certain halachas which needed B'Teira's Beis Din, not B'Teira Sanhedrin. So the Zugos were the two people who collectively together ran afterwards the Mesiras HaTorah. The first known Zug is the two Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan. They were the Talmidim of Antigonus, and during their Tkufa is the Nes of Chanukah. The Nes of Chanukah happens after Shimon HaTzadik, after Antigonus, and the Nes of Chanukah occurs during the time of Yosi ben Yoezer and Yosi ben Yochanan. The next pair, the next Zug, was Yehoshua ben Brachia and Nitai Ha'arbeli. This is the time that Yochanan Kohen Gadol had a dual position. We don't find the only one in the history that we find that was serving in two separate positions alternately. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was Saya Kohen Gadol and Saya Melech at the very same time. Very interesting and fascinating shilas in the Sugyas Amoraim and Sanhedrin, where the Melech goes to the Kohen Gadol goes to the Melech. He has a din Koved HaMalchus, he has a din for Kohen Gadol, etc., etc. Yochanan Kohen Gadol was Melech Yisroel and the Kohen Gadol at the very same time. After Yochanan Kohen Gadol, his son became, afterwards, he became Melech, and he became Yanai HaMelech. Yanai HaMelech, which is known as somebody who was Reidev the chachamim, and he wasn't a good person, but he took over the part of the melucha of his father. And he was Reidev the chachamim, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Prachia, he was one of the Zugas, as I said, Yehoshua ben Prachia, it doesn't say Rabbi. And Nitai Abeli ran away to Mitzrayim, and he only came back to Yerushalayim after his own Talmud, Shimon ben Shetach, who was a shvager of Yanai HaMelech. He made peace between Yehoshua ben Prachia and Yanai HaMelech, and he was able to come back to Shimon ben Shetach was a brother of the queen Shlemtzia, and Amalka was the wife of Yanai HaMelech. She protected him because her husband was not a good person. But Shimon ben Shetach, when he got close back to Yishvoger, he made peace between Yanai and Yehoshua ben Prachia, was able to return from the Golus of Mitzrayim, the Golus of that he ran away to. After the Zug from Yehoshua ben Prachia and Nitan HaBeli, we have the second Zug here in Pirkei Avos, Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach. Yehuda ben Tabai did not want really to take the Anhoga. Gemara tells us that he went to Mitzrayim, he was refusing to take over the Anhoga, but after they were mafzer him, he was misratz, and he took the Anhoga together with Shimon ben Shetach, because he knew Shimon ben Shetach is a shvoger from the Melech, he's not going to have any trouble. In the time of the Redifes, the Gemara tells us that Shlemtzian took her brother Shimon ben Shetach, she saved him, and one of the meals, talking about Koshel Bracha, the Sugyas Agmoim Brachas, she exposed her brother. She promised, she said, you can come out and I'll make sure my husband does not do anything evil to you. And Taka, they made up in that Suda, there was a Koshel Bracha, he didn't want to eat from the Suda, he made a Mezimun on the Koshel Bracha, and the peace came back at the Seif Yom of Yanai, who was Nifter, and his wife Shlemtzian Amalka, together with her brother, took over the Melucha, and she was a tzaddikas, and she gave back the hashpah to the chachamim. The next couple, which was at the end of the Tkufas HaChashmonoim, was Shmaya ve'Avtalyan. They were both Gerim. Avtalyan was Av Talio. He was a father of children. He was an Av Beis Din. Talia is called the Dayanim, and he's Av Talyain. He was the Av Beis Din. And the Malka wanted her children to take over, and she gave over the Melucha to Hyrcanus. The Gemara tells us a bunch of story. Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. There were two brothers that took over, and they were fighting with each other who is going to be the Melech. And the Romans came in, and that was the mice at the end of the Tkufas HaChashmoinoim, due to this machlekes between the two brothers, sons of Yana and Shlemtzi and Amalka. Afterwards, for a very short period, is the mishpacha of Bnei Besera, but they were there a very short time. We find the Gemara Bakom Pesach, Ben Besera, Bnei Besera. They gave over right away to the biggest Talmud of Shmaya Vavtali, Hillel HaZaken. They gave over the Hanhoge to Hillel HaZaken. They gave over the Hanhoge to Hillel HaZaken, and the reason why we just learned, because the Taka didn't have an answer, something about the halacha from Korban Pesach, and Hillel HaZaken told him the halacha, and as a result, he took over the biggest Talmud of Shmaya V'Avtalion. He took over from Bnei Mishpachas Bnei Beseira, and he became the Manhig. Hillel was a Tzedtzah, was an Einikol Ben Achar Ben from David HaMelech, was from Shevet Yehuda, and he established the Moshe that was called Nossi. The Nesius was established by Hillel. Be'emes, his first pair was not Shammai, it was Menachem, steht in the Gemara, but Menachem was taken over by the Melech to serve as part of the Malchus, and therefore Shammai HaZokein, and they became partners. They came by Plukta, and they Lemaise established two different Bata Midrashes. As we learned many times, we have Beis Shammai and we have Beis Hillel, and the machlekes between the Talmid Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel lasted for 3 to 4 generations after their Tkufa. It's all Talmidim and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. The Melech, after these two brothers couldn't make out, became Hordus. Hordus was the Melech, and he killed, Gemara states, V'horag roiv chachmi Yisroel, and he was Nebuch Yehaget Gans, the chachamim of the Yisroel. Therefore, he was trying to help him in being meshapetz. The Bayis Sheni, Mikdash Ho Mishal Leiro, Mikdash Miyomov, was a beautiful Beis HaMikdash with the erans and the modifications done by Hordus, who felt bad, he made a shtickle tshuva for killing the chachamim of Klal Yisrael. From that kufa onwards, they were two separate avenues that took place. You had the sheishelos of the Nesius, and there were the Chachmei HaMishnah. The second part of the first parak describes the hemshech of the sheishelos of the Nesius of Beis Hillel. And the second parak of Pirkei Avos discusses Hillel HaZaken and the Ha'avara, the Mesira of Torah to his big Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So let's first focus in the Sheishelos Beis Hillel. Hillel HaNasi, he had son Rabban Shimon, and he's very interesting. He's not mentioned in Pirkei Avos. According to Seder Tanoim v'Amoraim, he didn't live long. He was less than 1 year. He was nifter young, and therefore there's no maimer from Rabban Shimon ben Hillel. But his son, Rabban Gamliel, who's known to us as Rabban Gamliel HaZaken, who was in the Tkufa of Agrippa HaMelech at the end of Bayis Sheni, and he was, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the one who said to the Kesar Reimi, Ten li Yavne v'chachameo, and the Sanhedrin was goyle from Lishka Sagazis to Rechoiv, and thereafterwards to Yavne, Eser Golios Golso Sanhedrin. So this was the Sheishelos of Beis David, of the Nesius of Beis Hillel, who was a Tzedtzah of David HaMelech. The second parak, still from the Einiklach of Beis Hillel, we have Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who lemaise was the end of the Tkufa of the Tanoim, and he was the one who wrote the Mishnah. He was the one who was oirich the Mishnah. He had help from Rabbi Akiva v'Talmidov, and most Mishnayos were really said by Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says, "V'kula alibud Rabbi Akiva." One of them, Rabbi Nechemia, all the 5 Talmidim, each one was a Tesefta. One is Sifri, one is Safra, one Rabbi Shimon ben Mechilte, the word Mechilte of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai himself. So there is the Kula Alibud Rabbi Akiva, Lamaisa, the one who was Mesader and Oirech the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. He became a very, very good friend. More tells a story with the Kesar Remi Antoninus, and he was Greise Oisher, was Torah v'Gedolah b'Mokom Echad. He was Mesada the Mishnah, even though Dvorim Shebal Pei Yatarashoy Lekoisvam, and you're not allowed to write it, but because of Eis Lasos Lashem Efer Teresecho, he felt that by not writing and establishing the Mishnah, Biksav, Torah Ubitishtakach Torah Mi Yisroel's big arichas about the heter, and therefore he wrote and he was oirech the Mishnah. Then there were the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi was Rabbi Gamliel, not Rabbi Gamliel Azokein, but Rabbi Gamliel II. And this Rabbi Gamliel was the last door of the Tanoim and the first door of the Amoraim. Sometimes he surfaces on the radar as the end of the Tanoim. He lived in this exact period of exchange between Tanoim to Amoraim. If you look later on the Talmidim for Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai, there were 5 Talmidim which were the major Talmidim, which were Mamshich the Anhoga, the Avor of Torah Shebal Peh, even Tachas the Anhoga of Rabbi Gamliel, who was the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Rabbi Gamliel was, after Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai was nifta, Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai was psak and a lot of takonas during the time of Churban Beis Hamikdash. But la'achar Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai, Rabbi Gamliel took over, and he took his 5 Talmidim and he spread around to open yeshivas all over. And he sent Lamashal Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer went to Loid. Achar Rabbi Eliezer leLoid. He sent Rabbi Shua ben Chananya to Pki'in, which is a different place. He sent Rabbi Yossi to Tzipoiri. We find him in Tzipoiri. Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak, and he opened a branch, Nishmer and Nishveiniger, in Roimi, in Italia, in Roimi. And the one who was Rosh Yeshiva in Roimi was Masya ben Cheirish. Masya ben Cheirish is the one who was Rosh Yeshiva in Roimi. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Gamliel, who took over for Rabbi Yehuda ben Zakkai. And the last one who signs off the second parak of Pirkei Avos is Rab Tarfon, who was a Kohen Gadol. He was a Kohen in Beis Hamikdash, and he was one of the people who was Mamshich, the Avoras haTorah, from generation to generation. What I would like to discuss today, to add on and to discuss today, another nekuda in this Mesiras haTorah. We know there's a very famous dorot of the Briskerov, and the Briskerov says as follows. You know, when they come in to be Boaz, as we said before, Boaz was Eve's son, was from Shevet Yehuda, and as I always like to say, you know, there were 15 generations from Avram Avinu to David HaMelech, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yehuda. Yehuda have 2 sons, Peretz and Zerach. Peretz is a son Chetzrin, is a son Rom, is a son Aninodov, is a son Nachshem. Nachshem and Aminov has 4 children. One of them is Elimelech from Megillas Rus. One of them is the father of Noemi. One of them is Pliny Almoini. One of them is Salma or Shalmoin, who is Avi Boaz, and the father of Boaz, who was Yivtzon, one of the Sheftim. This is the Tkufa that takes place. Machal and Kilya, 2 sons of Elimelech, they die, and the wife Rus is to be married to Yomim Rishonim, Shteit Ramban in Parshas Vayeshev, was used to give over the almana to anybody who's a korav. So the right of first refusal should have gone to the uncle. And the uncle is Pliny Almaini, who is a brother of Elimelech, who is the uncle of Machlain, and not to Boaz, who is a son of another brother, who is the first cousin to Machlain. Machlain and Boaz are first cousins. The father, Salmon and Elimelech, were brothers, whereas Pliny Almaini, who appears in Megillas Rus, he is a brother of Elimelech, and therefore the Almana, since there was a concept of Korav, he had a right of first refusal to marry Rus. He doesn't want to marry Rus, and the reason why he doesn't want to marry Rus, I don't want, and he made a mistake in Amoinis. He did not want to marry her. He thought there was halacha Boaz, Ola, Shayro, Shteting Mo, and Ksubis. He did darsha the halacha of Amoinis, but he did not want to marry her. And the question that Marshor asking Yevom Estafayim Vavum the Beis, if he did not know the halacha of Amoinis, why does he have to say Pem Efgo and Bezari? He was afraid he's going to have children who are going to be small Amoinim Loch. Let him say, I don't want to marry her because she's a Chayvelavim. We know all of Chayvelavim is the Isur to marry Chayvelav. Kiddushin is Toifsim. We don't pass like Abakiva. But Lamaise, the halacha is Chayvelavim. It's Osir. Is the Isur Chastas and Chayvelavim. So Marshor says his own terror. It's a Mahalach. But Be'emes is halacha of Esedei Chalesa. So the Gemara Yevom says that really every almana to Kohen Gadol should be a halacha of Esedei Chalesa in all Chayvelavim. And the reason why there is no Esedei Chalesa is because Gazrin and Bia Rishayna ought to be a Shnia, because the whole essay of Mitzvah of Yibam is only by Bia Rishayna, and thereafter the Yisur Lav blibes. So Mimele, B'yachas to him, he could marry her. And every Chayvelavim should be able to marry. There was a Gzeir, he says in the time of Boaz, the Gzeir wasn't around, so mainly he was able to marry her. He was afraid, since the Izah Chayvelavim, my kids are going to be called Kleina Amoinim Lach, Kleina Moyavim Lach. He didn't want. As I stated, Marsha, Briskerov says a beautiful word. And this is why it's associated negir to what we're learning right now. Torah Shabbal Peh, Torah Shabiksav is Torah Shabiksav, is the Chavdal Tzfar. Torah Shabbal Peh has two chalokim to it. As I stated in Rambam in Hilchos Mamrim. One chalik is halacha Moshe Misinai, which is given from generation to generation. Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai Mesora Yehoshua, he gave, there were 3,178 halachas which were given from Mesiras haTorah from dorot to dorot. And also there is part to Torah Shabbal Peh, which is Yud Gimel Midas haTorah Nidreshes B'hem. You know, we say in davening in the morning, Shmuel Lema Yud Gimel Midas, those are mikoiches anim shoches el alev, which Baruch Hu gave to Moshe to give over to the chachamim, that through all these tools and vehicles they are able to darshe goyrin and moisifin, etc., etc. What's the difference between the two of them? The halacha is ein beizin yochel levatel divrei beizin chaver ken godel men b'chochma b'minyan. Which means that if a Bezdin came in Darsha the Kavachimer and comes in a generation later, 2 generations later, 3 generations later, and there were Godlim Imenu B'chochma B'minyan, they can uproot and diffuse the halacha which was the Darshan by the first Bezdin. That's the halacha. This is only if the halacha Shantei Shabbal Peh is learned from Yud Gimel Midas Shatei Nidreshes B'hem. However, if it is given via halacha l'mishim Sinai, divrei kabbalah, ein bei machlekes lo'ilam, you cannot do anything about it. Anything which was given through Moshe to Yehoshua and to zekenim and thereon and thereafter cannot be interchangeable. So the Briskerov says a beautiful, the Gemara says a story that when David wanted to become a melech, Adoim became, so famous long Gemara, we don't have time, and he said, could he be a melech? He says, well, you asking, he could be a melech. He's not royal over Bekol. He asked the chachamim, he asked this and that, and nobody had the terrorists because the Doeg Adoim, he asked kashas, elo me'ato mitzvah le'mitzvah mamzer le'mamzeres, which is not true. And Bolach Huzale, and then Amosa ben Yeser, who was the shvoger of David HaMelech, he took his cherev ki Shmuel, and Omar kol mi shelo shemei halacha zu yidoker becherev kach mekublani min beis dina shel Shmuel haramosi. What happens here? Says the Briskerov, they all knew these halacha of Amoraim, but they thought, the Goyal thought, that the halacha of Amoraim v'la'amoinis is one of Yud Gimel Midas haTorah nidreshes b'hem. So he says, you know what? I can marry. I don't have a problem to marry her because right now we darshan this halacha. But what's going to happen in 100 years, in 200 years? He predicted what's going to happen. It's going to come one day and they're going to say, you know what? It's nicht richtig. When David HaMelech come 4 generations, the Boaz has a son, Ovid has a son, Yisroel has a son, David, and they want to crown David to become a Melech after Shaul. They're going to say, no, you're not allowed to be a Melech. Why? Because the toast was Kach mekubelani mebeis dina shel Shmuel Ramos Amoraim v'la'amoinis ba'vel Moavis. It's halacha l'mishmisina as they state in Rambam in Hilchos Yisroel that Amoraim v'la'amoinis halacha l'mishmisina. Mimeli can have all the kashas in the world. This is the Briskerov famous word. The question, however, is that if the halacha was halacha l'mishmisina, I mean, Boaz knew it's halacha l'mishmisina. I mean, halacha l'mishmisina is not something Shmuel HaNavi. If it's halacha l'mishmina, had to be given from door to door. What's happening over here? So I wanted to suggest, and I told it once to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the Gemara says that there were Gimel, Meos, 3,000, 1,700, Kalvachoimers, whatever was Yishtakach b'me'evel shel Moshe. Why was it Yishtakach? Because Yehoshua shepherded with Moshe. He told him, Moshe Rabbeinu told Yehoshua, do you have any sfeikas? He says, I know anything. Moshe Rabbeinu was Tzibrochon, ובעבוין זה נשתכחו מישוע דהלוכס, נאף על פי כן שטייט, אוסניאל בן כנז, the shefet was machzir, mitoich pilpule. The Rambam says, נקדומת יד החזק, I'd like to quote, אף על פי שלניכתב בתורה שבעל פה, לימדו משה רבינו כולו בבית דין לשבעים זקנים, ואלעזר ופנחס ויהושע, שלושתם קיבלו ממשה. There were 3 people who were mekabel from Moshe, Elazar, Pinchas, and Yehoshua. Okay? Now, the halacha is nishtakach from Yehoshua because he was ba'avoin. Rashi says in Tamura, shegorom lahachlish daitoi of Moshe Rabbeinu. L'chura is a private oynish to Yehoshua binun, but the others did not have that oynish. So, if you look at the Rambam later, the Rambam says ve'Elazar uPinchas v'Yehoshua kiblu mimoshe. ולישוע שהוא תלמידו של משה רבינו מוסר תורה שבעל פה וציווהו עליו וכן ישוע כל יום עוד לומד על פה וזקנים רבים קיבלו ישוע וקיבל אלי מן הזקנים ומפנחס ושמואל קיבל מאלה בזדינו. The Rambam says clearly and precisely Torah went through different channels. Eli was mekabel from Pinchas and Shmuel was mekabel from Eli. So if we would like to suggest that perhaps the halachas which were nishtakach from Yehoshua was only nishtakach from Yehoshua. So the people who received the Torah from Yehoshua through their channel, those halacha were nishtakach. And that was what the Goyal was afraid of. It's Yud Gimel Midas haTorah nidreshes b'hem. It could be reversible. When Amasa ben Yeseh came, he says, Kach mekublan b'v'stisha Shmuel Aramasi. Shmuel Aramasi had his own channel of Kabbalah Satayr. He was mekabel from Eli. And the Rambam says Eli was mekabel from Pinchas. Pinchas never forgot those halachas. If you never forgot those halachas, klapehim, it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Bottom line, we have Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is 2 halakim. Yud Gimel Midas haTorah nidreshes b'hem, which are changeable. We have Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is halacha l'Moshe Misinai, which ain't by machlekes lo'elam. We would just like to suggest that perhaps this halacha of Amoraim v'la'amoinis, which we're going to be reading in Megillas Rus, was one of the halachas which were nishtakach. It was chayzer midin Yud Gimel Midas haTorah nidreshes b'hem, but only to Yehoshua and the people who mekabel Torah via his channel. Eli and Pinchas had their own channel. From then the Torah was never mishtakach. It remained halacha l'Moshe Misinai.